1997 Nissan pickup truck, KA24E engine. It's developed a startup rattle that lasts 4 to 6 seconds. I'm going to inspect the timing chain and, if needed, adjust any excessive slack out of it. If you've installed a new timing chain or have an older chain that has developed startup rattle, this video should help you understand one of the causes of this rattle and suggest one way that can be used to adjust a timing chain. So most of the disassembly is done. I had to remove the air filter here. The power steering belt had to come loose, and there's a bracket in here that I had to remove. And I also removed the spark plugs so that I can spin the engine over easy. And let's remove the valve cover and see what we find. So we need to check to see just how loose that chain is on the driver's side. I'm going to put a little light in there so we can see just a little bit better. See if that'll work. Right now, as you can see, that chain fairly snug there on the driver's side, which is about where it should be. But in order to check that, let me grab a socket here. Need to rotate the engine backwards, just maybe just a half a degree. That was just about right. I know how to do it. Let's check that chain now, because this is where all the startup rattle would be coming from. And you know, you can almost make that slap right now on that guide. And the guide, that plastic guide, actually looks like it's in good shape. It's not broken up. Seems to be pretty tight in there. I think we're going to be able to leave that guide in there, but you can see, I know a lot of people say that it's a characteristic of these engines to have startup rattle, but you're risking, look how loose that chain is there when it's slack, see? I don't know if you can see that in there, but you're risking it jumping a tooth here and going out of time. I can almost pull it up one tooth right now. I can almost jump it one tooth by manually doing this. But next we need to check the passenger side and just see how much free piston play we have on the hydraulic tensioner. So let's do that. So to determine how much free piston play on that hydraulic tensioner we have on the passenger side, we need to rotate the engine again the other direction. You'll see it doesn't take much. That's enough to do it. So I've got a light down in there, and hopefully you'll be able to see the piston coming out of the hydraulic tensioner. I'll try to hold this as steady as I can. Right there, I'm touching it right now. That's the piston, that shiny piece. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to push the adjustable guide into the piston, and we'll see just how much movement there is. There you can see it. That looks like about 1/4 of an inch. And that's where all that startup noise is coming from. That when we crank over the engine before the oil pressure has time to build, for some reason that piston collapses, and then the chain loosens up and it starts making all that noise. Let me do that one more time. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure how far that piston is working back and forth in there. And again, there's the piston right there. I'm touching it. We need to eliminate that travel that piston is moving back and forth. And once we do that, we shouldn't have any more startup rattle. Pretty simple fix. So measuring the free piston movement, I don't have any instrument to stick down in there. It's quite a ways down in there. It's that must be 6-7 inches down in there. So what you can get a piece of plastic or a piece of paper, cardboard, make yourself a go/no-go gauge. And this one here, just a piece of plastic. Curve it so it'll go in there. And right now, I'll just keep reducing the end on it. A little more. Looks like it's going to end up being right about 1/4 of an inch. Just a little slightly more. You can get it really close just by taking your time. And there it is. It's perfect. It slides right in there. Now we'll go ahead and cut a tensioner spacer, and we'll slide that over the end of that piston. Take up all that loose chain slack that's in there. Now I've got this set up so I can pull get that chain pulled off of there. But normally how I've been doing these is I line that keyway on the cam gear right about 12 o'clock, 11:30 or 12. And this time I went one step further, and what I did was I lined up I found top dead center, and I marked the timing mark for the cam gear, and I also marked the chain. So I've got that lined up. It takes a little bit, but I'm going to go ahead and stuff a rag down here. Keep anything from falling down into my oil pan. Stuffed that down nice and tight. Then I'm going to go ahead and remove the cam bolt, and we'll see if we can't get that piston out of there to put the tensioner spacer on it. This is to cushion the head there so it doesn't get dented. This will go in there and hold the gear from turning. Get my breaker bar here. to need to back it off a little bit and get that socket extension out of there. Okay, now that I've got the measurement taken that I need to cut that tensioner spacer to, I'm going to make sure there's some more rag stuff down in here. And I'm going to take this, take the cam gear off. But before we take that off, I usually bungee cord it up to the hood off to the side. Here's a bungee cord. I usually take it right up here. There's usually some holes up here off on the driver's side that you can hook into, and then that'll come down and hook in here. You don't want the chain to slack up and drop off of the crank gear on the bottom, otherwise you're going to be pulling the whole front of the engine off, and that's very time consuming. I'm going to take this gear out of here and hook it right into the chain. And just make sure I hold it up there real tight. And just keep pressure on the chain all the time. There we go. Now that won't drop off the gear on the bottom. And now I need to get that piston loose. And make sure this rag is stuffed underneath the piston, because if that piston comes out and happens to drop off of what you're working with, we don't want it to go down into the oil pan. Usually when that chain loosens up, it loosens up the rag a little bit because the adjustable guide moves away from the piston. Now I need to get a one of these here, or if your hands and fingers are small enough, you might be able to reach down there and get it, but this usually works good for me. And here we got the piston came out. Now I've got to go back in there, and that spring is loose, so I'm going to take it out. But if it was tight in there, I'd just leave it. You've got a hold of the rag a little bit. And there's the spring. Now we need to go ahead and measure and cut that tensioner spacer and get it fitted to the piston. Gotcha. Okay, so this was my that go no-go gauge I was using to measure the distance that the piston had on the free play, and it ended up being 300 thousandths. So we need to cut that tensioner spacer to 300 thousandths, and here's the tensioner spacer I'm going to be using. But we'll pull that off of there. And right now it's right about a ½ inch. And there's several different ways of trimming them. What I found best, or just one way of doing it, is to take a block of wood and screw it together so it's nice and square. And then if you've got yourself a drill press, drill a hole just slightly smaller than that spacer, and that spacer will slide in there. Clamp it up. Then we can hacksaw it, and we need to go 300 thousandths plus the thickness of the hacksaw blade, which looks like it's at 40 thousandths. So that's 340 thousandths that we need to make that. And I usually go just a little bit more than 340. 5 thousandths more, something like that. So I measure this to 340 thousandths. It's got to go down just a little bit. Okay, that's at 345 thousandths. Clamp that up nice and tight, and you can see that's not moving at all. And then we'll go ahead and when you hold this hacksaw on here, the blade is nice and square, and you just go ahead and cut it off. So now here we have it's been cut off, and it's going to have a little burr on it, so, and it's a little bit long, so I usually take it over like on a flat sanding block and just surface it down a little bit. Make it nice and flat on there. And I twist it as you're doing that. And we're right at about 330 thousandths. If we go ahead and take a like a 400 grit and just deburr the inside and the outside a little bit. And wipe it clean. A little oil on it. And when this fits on the piston, it should fit nice and tight. It's like suction cupped in there. I might even have to get a... It fits on there nice and tight. There's no reason to... it's not going to come off of there when it gets into the engine. You can see it fits on there tight. So we'll press that on there and it's ready to go in the engine. Okay, now we'll put that the piston and the spring and the spacers on there, and it's just there. Those spacers are fit to go on there within about a thousandth of an inch, and they fit so nice and tight that they're not. Once they get oil in there, it's not going to come off of there. We'll go ahead and fish this back in there. We got that in. Cool. Okay, now that I've got that spacer in there, I put a wedge in there to keep it in place. I'm going to put this gear back on. We want to lift up on that chain, take the bungee off, and then line the timing mark up with the chain link that was marked. And that gear, if that spacer is too long, the gear won't go on. And if the spacer is just about right, then the gear should just slide right on there. We'll see how we did here. It looks like it's sliding on there. And if for some reason your camshaft has rotated one way or the other, what works good is if you can put your vehicle in gear and then just push it or pull it just slightly, and it'll make that cam gear move it enough so that you can get it on there. But it looks like it's going right on. I might have to push my truck, there we go, or back it up just a little bit. And I'm pulling on the truck now, and you can see the gear, it'll move slightly. Now I've got to go back a little more. This, in order to have it properly tensioned chain, this should just slide on without having to pound it on with, and it's sliding on there just snugly. So now we'll go ahead and put the bolt in there, and we'll check the tension of the chain and see how it looks. You shouldn't have to pry that on. But then it shouldn't be too loose either, because the chain will be too loose. Now that chain should be just a little bit loose. Shouldn't be real tight. And you can maybe get a stick in there and kind of see it, but yeah, see, it's much tighter than what it was, and I don't think that's going to make the startup rattle anymore. And then I'll check the passenger side here, rotate it the other direction. And that adjustable guide, it's moving just about a 1/16 of an inch, which is about right. So it's moving just slightly. That's where I'm going to leave it. And that should take the startup rattle out. I'm going to go ahead and put it all back together and start it up. So the truck is set overnight. I'm going to do a cold startup, and we'll listen for any startup rattle. Sounds good to me. I've been fixing them for several years this way, and I've never had one come back. So if you've installed a new timing chain kit, or if you've just got an older engine that has developed a startup rattle, this is just one option that's available to go in there and adjust the chain.